If there is one man who will forever be remembered in Scotland, it is William Wallace, Scotland's greatest national hero and the lead inspiration for Scottish resistance, whose bravery ensured a great fight with the English to secure Scotland's independence. In this video, we will be going through the life of Sir William Braveheart Wallace, who served as the guardian of the Kingdom of Scotland in their early years of struggle to be free from English rule. Sir Wallace was a force to be reckoned with and was a symbol of courage, fierceness, and unrelenting doggedness, a true man of the people. Sir William Wallace was born in the year 1270 near Paisley, Renfrew in Scotland. He was the second son of Wallace Elderslie in Renfrewshire. As with many Scots, Elder Wallace was a landowner even though not much of a mogul, and he was James' vassal. James was the fifth Steward of Scotland. In 1296, King Edward I of England removed the Scottish King John de Balliol, imprisoned him, and declared himself to be the head of Scotland. However, there was a tough resistance to this turn of events in May 1297 when William Wallace in a team with 30 other men devastated Lanark, burned it to the ground, and eliminated the English sheriff. Sir William Douglas would soon be part of the team. Douglas joined Williams in the rampage, and their next stop after Lanark was Scone, where they chased out the English justiciar and attacked every military stronghold from Rivers Forth to Tray. Following these developments, Robert the Bruce, later installed as King Robert I, raised an army that would go on to lose in July 1297 to the English, who were led by Sir Robert de Clifford and Sir Henry de Percy at Irvine. This did not deter Wallace from his mission, since he had a larger company in the forest of Selkirk. He advanced to besiege Dundee, but had to abandon it to face a greater opposition coming: the English army that was progressing towards Stirling under the command of John de Warenne, the Earl of Surrey. John de Warenne tried to no avail to make Wallace agree to terms outside the walls of Stirling. On the morning of September 11, 1207, the English were in battle formation across a narrow bridge over the Forth River. Wallace, on the other hand, in a team with Murray, had positioned in the northwest of the Abbey Craig. Wallace strategically commanded his army such that there was no fight until he was sure that half of the English army had crossed the river. Then the Wallace-led army struck with such fierceness that almost all the English who crossed the river were either killed by the sword or drowned in the river. None of them escaped. The Earl of Surrey, having seen the havoc that Wallace and his men had inflicted on his army, retreated swiftly with his remaining soldiers and destroyed the linking bridge. However, some of the Scots crossed with the help of a ford and chased them. With only a fraction of his men, the Earl escaped to Berwick and York. The moments following this event signaled the chain of reaction that freed Scotland from English oppression. Wallace and Murray would later write to the towns of Lubeck and Hamburg to resume their long-halted trade with the Scots, since their land had been recovered from the English. It was not long after this that Murray died owing to the long-time injury he sustained at Stirling Bridge. Following this, Wallace besieged Northumberland and Cumberland, while burning the Alnwick region and destroying Carlisle. However, he granted immunity to the monks of Hexham and ensured that none in his army laid a finger on them. After his return to Scotland, Wallace was knighted, titled, and installed to be the guardian of the kingdom. By the authority of King John de Balliol, who was then a prisoner in London, Wallace braced himself to stay in charge of the affairs of his kingdom by reorganizing the army and regulating the situation in the country. This action was perceived to be wise by high-ranking men like Bishop Robert Wishart of Glasgow, Sir John Stuart, Sir John Graham of Dundaff, Sir John Cummin, alias the Red, Robert de Bruce, and others. However, many of the nobles hesitated to give their consent. This was because they had estates and several hostages in King Edward's hand, and took a lukewarm position with Wallace's leadership. For this narrative to be changed, Wallace had to defeat King Edward in battle. In 1298, the Earl of Surrey returned and relieved the castles of Roxburgh and Berwick and decided to advance further, but was ordered by King Edward to stop. On the flip side, King Edward himself went over the Tweed on July 3rd, and with him were a forceful cavalry, Irish and Welsh auxiliaries, and a body of archers as they advanced towards Stirling. Wallace retreated sluggishly while devastating the regions behind him. He did this so that the English army, led by Edward, would not be able to resupply its needs while advancing. Edward and his army in their journey were now half-starved and becoming sluggish in their advancement. It was at the point of retreating near Kirkliston on July 21st that Edward heard that Wallace was awaiting his arrival near Falkirk. Edward, being heady, advanced his army and found Wallace carefully positioned on the sloppy ground with his front being protected by a river. Since the English cavalry had a difficult time crossing the river and the marshy terrain that was adjacent, they resumed launching repeated charges on the circular battle formations, the four schiltrons of Wallace's spearmen. They were successful in driving off the small group of Scottish horses that were under Comyn, but failed to make even a single impression on the schiltrons, and the English army sustained numerous losses. Notwithstanding, it was the turn of the archers to launch, and the fierceness of their arrows broke through the rank of the spearmen, and the charges by the 1st Cavalry turned them to flight. In this rampage, thousands of Scots were put to death, and among the dead were Sir John Stuart and Sir John de Graham. Wallace, however, broke through the ranks and retreated with the survivors, but burned Stirling and Perth along the way. King Edward, being unable to maintain his army in Scotland, returned southward, arriving in Carlisle on September 8th. Wallace, on the other side, relinquished his guardianship in December 1298, and his successors were Bruce and Comyn. There are pieces of evidence that show that Wallace journeyed to France in 1299 and returned to Scotland to be a solitary guerrilla leader. However, 4 years after 1299, nothing was heard of Wallace, but the ravaging rebellion he led continued till 1304, and it was at this point that the Scottish nobles surrendered to King Edward. It is still a wonder how this resistance continued to exist through Wallace's influence, and yet Wallace was one man who was relentlessly hunted by King Edward. Sir John Menteith, through treachery, was able to arrest Wallace near Glasgow in 1305. Wallace was conveyed to Dumbarton Castle and was possibly brought before King Edward during the journey. On August 23, 1305, Wallace was carried to Westminster Hall, where he was unanimously indicted by the men and condemned to death. There was no trial since the charges against him were that he was a traitor to the king. However, Wallace denied the charges since he never for once swore allegiance to the king. On the same day, Wallace was hanged, disemboweled, decapitated, and his body divided into 4 pieces at Smithfield. His head was placed for everyone to see on London Bridge, and his hands and legs were exposed at Newcastle, Stirling, Perth, and Berwick. However, it was in 1306 that Bruce, Wallace's successor, led the rebellion that finally won the independence that Scotland so much longed for. History holds that Wallace never married, nor did he father any child. Interestingly, there is no clear description of what he looks like or a portrait to help describe him. Many of the thrilling stories about Wallace are linked to the late 15th century romance written by Harry the Minstrel. The most popular tales do not have any support by pieces of evidence from documentaries, but they are the succinct revealer of Edward's heart for his people. Till date, a huge statue of Wallace stands on the zenith of Abbey Craig Rock, close to Stirling. In the Academy Award-winning film by Mel Gibson, Braveheart talked about Wallace's life loosely. This movie birthed the included epithet Braveheart to William Wallace, hence making him William Braveheart Wallace, the hero of Scotland who defeated English armies and reclaimed the Kingdom of Scotland.